questioning, its attention to dissonance, and its resistance to assimilation. Zach's writing experiments with negative capability and the retroactivities of pop culture. In its sometimes foundational approaches to concerns of spiritual origin and injustice, his work isn't hemmed in by taxonomies. Zach, someday you'll probably need no introduction, but tonight I'm happy to get the chance.
That was very sweet. Thank you all for coming. I want to especially say thank you to Sara and Zach and Blake for believing in my writing career for about 10 years now, and all my good friends, and especially my teachers and professors at Roosevelt and my classmates. I really appreciate you being here. So my thing is split into 3 parts. I'm going to start with 2 dead dad poems, and then we're going to move into this poem about having brain yeast, and then we're going to look at some photos that I took. Okay, so the first one is called Commerce, Georgia, which is a little town outside of Atlanta where I grew up for a bit. Stomping over the red clay, roiling with fire ants, making their nest in the undergrowth, we'd ford the creek with help of a felled tree, tying strings to sticks and baiting them with syrupy gum. Zoe and I would sit catching frogs. I remember something had turned the town gray. People kept moving, and Zoe would threaten to leave me in the sewer outside of the library if I couldn't keep quiet. So I learned to, and so manic and sick of the red clay where nothing grew, our father left for California, but turned around when he ran halfway out of money. Sad. This next one's called Elegy for a Ford Truck Man. This is the story of how my father was 2 cars, how for a long time I was his only passenger. I barely tell people about the good days, the 1965 Cherry Ford Pristina, days of Thunderbird miserly guarded in the garage. In that antique, we took our depressed dog to Creve Coeur Lake Park. I skated the margin of the water as they ambled. We went to the movies, took a rafting trip once. I've told this story before to a few deaf ears, so if I seem bored or reticent or if the metaphor is imperfect, I apologize. I tell people plainly there were a lot of bad days when he was bloated, sanguine in shade, had 2 tanks crammed in a Ford F-150, 2 tanks you never stopped consuming. I know the gray inside smelled of cigarettes, filtered ultralight, plastic bottled vodka, Hostess donuts, gasoline, timeless American insatiability, driving me to school. On a good day, I'll indulge fantasy, pretend a Ford Uberman is him, reclaimed, rubber tires spinning over slick rain, pitter-patter, pushing pavement, simple silence, his twin calyx again, back of head, suggesting me to sleep. Now, let's get serious. Okay, this is called Candida, Songs of Brain Yeast. So it's broken up into 3 parts. So this is the first part. It's really hard to read. I practiced it so hard, but whatever, okay. As fatigue crept in the gallery, they all remembered how Jesus had prayed for his return to glory. They remembered he had witnessed the totality of human sin in the Garden of Gethsemane with relative ambivalence. Their attentions feverishly avalanched onto one painting. Through inspection, they came to see this seemingly muted piece contained almost deafening layers of black and white oils. This reminded them of a home, but not their own. For a time, they would just be there. Their visions blurred with tremors and tears. They stood like seeds. In a brain like an oven, thoughts oozed down gutters, puddling on the floor. Aqueous ideas mixed in candida pockets, creating dough. The raw of it browned slowly in the incandescence of a billion neural explosions and ascended into the form of a labyrinth. Song 2. They walked listlessly through the maze, some breaking off chunks of the marbled hedging, making crumbs that would mark the path of egress, and each destructive action was an inclination towards aversion and maybe self-preservation. They tried to tell stories to pass the time. They had personal stories, ways of explaining themselves. Ids, demons, and superdemons all populated the corridors of the maze, taunting them with fragments incalculably charged. The whites and blacks of the painting remained static in their outer fields of vision, some grayed. They could see light sneaking through, and it felt to them like some terrifying twilight end. Undaunted, they continued their way to the structure's core. A rhythmic murmur set the pace for their shadowy descent. Neural passageways cropped up, vanished, hearts beated. The paths became obscured as their focuses began to oscillate from inner to outer. In a series of strobing images, there was a long climb followed by an inevitable set of falls, after which they were consumed in a dark, heatful womb filled with starch, the place where all life began. Nothing ever felt so familiar. Words fell away and time passed on the geologic scale. They stayed there, drenched in darkness so long that their eyes turned white from lack of use. This space, which they had known always, haunted them with its dark and dominant nature. They came to know it in the way they knew themselves, not by name. Song 3. When at last a light returned them from blindness, their outer fields of visions remained. Minds awash in the antiseptic glow of a stark room, the palliative effects of the medicinal and the museological mixed in mud, caked to their shoes, stashed in the closet. The room tasted like cucumber salt water through intravenous drip. Outside they could hear the screeching, scratching, amelodic songs of the damned. A sensory collage emerged full of anguished tones and images mingling, booming and bleeding, bubbles bursting. Everything was a growth industry, especially suffering. They could feel the red in their hands and the white of the room. Like the poet Rabindranath Tagore, their eyes melted into tears, 1,001 streams to deluge each, with one assurance, I am the bread of God. And in that moment, they were content to know God would swallow them whole. That's the brain yeast one. This thing's kind of wonky. So I live in Uptown, and Sara Silton recently moved into my neighborhood, and a lot of people don't recognize her because she's been wearing these very large sunglasses. But I recognize her because I'm a big fan. I watched The Simple Life. So I recognized her and I was like, hey Paris, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm just been scrawling erratically all over the neighborhood. I made a little magazine about it. It's split into 3 parts. The first section is like ecology. She had a really big worm period. And then the next one is brands/elegy. So it's like brands and then brands that are dying. And then the third one is just like politics and like odds and ends and stuff. So this was, I should have looked it up. I think this is from the Bible. This one I saw, this was at the Art Expo at Navy Pier in the bathroom. It says, worm on the street, suffering is a growth industry. So her and I have a lot in common. What? Hilton Hotel's now worm wife. This is actually a rare photo of her. She let me take. You can kind of see her iconic blonde hair, and she's wearing a Chanel Paris scarf, Parisian silk. And then I believe this is from the poem by Percy Shelley, Ozymandias. This was in the men's locker room of Columbia. I don't know how she got down there. It says, there used to be a Sky Mall. Can you imagine? There are only 3,000 Ford Broncos left in the wild. That's actually not funny. You can't really see this one. She was off a bean when she wrote this one. It says, it just says McDonald's. It was a bold move, because that's the McDonald's that we go to. Like, I don't know. Oh, this is a really good meditative poem, I thought. Imagine tying your shoes. I didn't want to include this one, but the publisher at the magazine place, this was her favorite. It says, in our surveillance state, exhibitionists live in a constant horniness. And I think that's very sad. Oh, Fashion Fridays. These are very Paris is out there. She's got a notebook. Poop is a growth industry. This is a clearly, we're moving into anti-gentrification type thing. This just says, stop building shit. Oh, this one says, Sam, the first night at bed when you left, Ron made out with 2 girls. And I'm not totally sure. I think that might be something about her personal life. This was an attempt to kind of ensnare Banksy. It's my words. And then this one's unsigned, but you know it's her because this dog is in front of the Hilton on Michigan Avenue. And I was debating, so it's oil on steel, and we were debating whether to call it fuck dogs or fuck police. And I think my love for dog is actually very well documented, and I know Paris had Tinkerbell and many other dogs. So we ended up calling this piece Fuck Police. Thank you again. Thank you.